Let's get started. Remember, if you've got a question to ask, just ask your question in the chat. Remember to ask your question in the chat. Hopefully, we'll see you there. Meanwhile, our systems are getting set up. Hopefully, we're connecting through. There we are on Facebook and YouTube and other locations. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. First story of the day from Bloomberg. Korea unveils $450 billion push for global chip making crown. Let's take a look. Korea's investment could shift chipset manufacturing from Japan and Taiwan. Korea is introducing a $451 billion package to support industries in manufacturing chipsets. The plan aims to consolidate chipsets manufacturing to Korean companies. Korea's investment could create a surplus of chipsets, which could meet demand for semiconductors. We know that supply has been constrained. This could cement Korea's position as a chipset powerhouse. The investment could stimulate demand for chemical manufacturers that supply goods which are used in semiconductors. Investors could invest in chemical companies like LG Chemical, Shin-Etsu Chemical, Nippon Chemical. Those are just some ideas, but it's a recurring theme that we're going to see more and more these days, and that is more and more economies are going to be bringing home manufacturing and trying to do more in their domestic market. Now, here you can also see that there's I guess if you think about inflation for a moment, you can think about the idea that we have a lot of supply constraints right now because of the shutdown. What they're trying to do, number one, is deal with those supply constraints by bringing more supply online. The second part of this is trying to make sure that they have the chip production leadership. Let's look at the next story. Biden pitches $147 billion EV plan in Michigan, and he takes a truck for the spin. Huh? Biden can drive? What? Come on. All right. So the U.S. amps up EV investments to compete with China. Joe Biden's proposed a $174 billion electric vehicle investment plan. This policy aims to bring American automobile production back to America locally. He lamented that the U.S. is behind China in a number of electronic vehicles sold. In fact, truthfully, if you go to China, I mean, there was many times when I was in China where I almost got hit by a motorcycle. It was kind of amazing because I was standing on the side of the road. I was about to walk out into the road, and all of a sudden a motorcycle went whizzing by me. I didn't even hear him because these so many electrically charged motorcycles in China that, they don't make any sound. And also the electronic vehicles in China is massive also. So it's really a competitive space, and China has the lead for sure. But this plan could intensify the competition between China and the U.S. to become the global leader in electronic vehicle production. This race could put upward pressure on commodity prices like copper, silicon, and lithium ion. These are used to make microchip semiconductors and also EV car batteries. Now, I would just say the big difference between the U.S. and Biden administration committing to the EV versus China is that a lot of times when the U.S. commits to something from the government level, it's hard to get that money into the economy and really making a difference for the manufacturers. Whereas with China, I think that's a different story. They're able to put a huge amount of money into these manufacturers. Next story comes from the BBC. UK farmers sound alarm over Australia trade talks. Australia, mate. UK plans to make a trade deal with Australia. The UK is negotiating for cheaper food and farming imports, but faces a pushback from local farmers. The UK has been eager to strike free trade deals in a post-Brexit world. So this is the UK's first deal with a nation with which it didn't have an agreement while still part of the EU. A successful deal with Australia could help UK enter the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And joining the partnership would remove 95% of tariffs on goods traded between the members and increase the UK's influence in Asia-Pacific region, especially following the US's withdrawal from the TPP. Now, the US, Trump withdrawed from the TPP, and basically one angle of the TPP was that it was designed by corporates, not really by governments. And I think that was one thing. The second thing about the TPP that I always found a bit annoying was the fact that China is America's #1 trading partner, but the TPP didn't include China. Well, it was clearly a political strategy to get all the other Asian nations on the side of the US and then isolate China. I just think it's a bad idea. I mean, why can't the US do a trade deal with China or get them involved and get them to play by those same rules? The point that I would make is that China does not want to be an enemy or at war with the US. They'd much rather be friends. And I would say that the US has an opportunity to do that, but they missed it. London's tops Hong Kong for world's priciest warehouse space. So man, Hong Kong used to be so expensive. UK warehouse costs and rented space in the UK and across Europe have increased. Logistics properties costs in the UK rose 13% in 2020, making it the most expensive place to operate warehouses. Total space rented increased 44%. That's massive. And warehouse space rented in Europe increased 14%. So demand has been strong. E-commerce and supply chain demand continue to require more space. Manufacturers have kept more inventory on hand to prevent future shortages. Investors could consider warehouses and storage REITs as potential investments. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports the next story: stop new oil investments to hit net zero emission. So this is IEA is saying, stop all that. International Energy Agency offers more realistic roadmap to achieving carbon neutrality. The IEA claims that the US, UK, and EU's current plans fall short of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. They proposed a roadmap to help countries achieve their goals. Some of those proposals were ending sales of combustion engine cars by 2035 and raising investment in global energy sector to $5 trillion. Yes, that's $1 trillion. And where do governments get money? From you, the taxpayer. So is the taxpayer going to put up $5 trillion? I would say maybe not. Now, it reminds me of the whole concept of printing money. And right now we have a situation in America where the US dollar has been printed, the massive amount of dollar printing by the Fed, but yet the dollar hasn't really crashed yet. And people have talked about modern monetary theory and the idea that why should the US government stop spending? If they are the reserve currency of the world, they can spend into oblivion. Well, I would argue that that's exactly right. As long as you're the reserve currency of the world and you can hold that position, the dollar may not be threatened. But the minute that there is a crack in that, the dollar will absolutely collapse. So all the MMTers, I believe, will be found out to be wrong once the holes in the system start to crack. But breaking those holes and those cracks is going to take a lot because the US, number one, controls the whole global financial system. Number two, they control the seas, the Navy, and they control the military, and they are going to fight to hold that position. So that's an argument as to why the dollar has been relatively strong despite a massive amount of printing. Now, we can see that the dollar is devaluing in the US relative to the goods and services that are available, but that devaluation of the currency is going to take more time, particularly because so many companies outside of the US are transacting in US dollars, borrowing in US dollars, and the result of that is that there's still demand for US dollars outside of the US. Now, the next piece of news, the world's biggest vaccine maker in India hopes to export COVID-19 shots by year end. Wait a minute, I thought that Biden was going to export 20 million shots. Well, India's got a shot at that too. Let's look at that. COVID outbreak in India puts a pause on vaccination programs in poorer countries. The Serum Institute of India has been producing over 100 million doses of AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. However, the recent COVID outbreak in India forced SSI to put a pause on these exports. This was a major blow to vital vaccination programs in poorer countries, less developed, like Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Luckily, Nepal and Sri Lanka are not huge, so maybe they can be satisfied. Bangladesh is a much larger population than those two. And let's look at this in a little bit more detail. The extended freeze caused less developed countries to scramble for vaccines. This may further hurt economic recovery in these regions and possibly exacerbate the wealth inequalities between less developed countries and developed countries. Again, Biden administration has said they're going to give out 20 million vaccine doses. Maybe this is where they should go, to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. Let's see. China bans institutions from cryptocurrency activities. This is an important story. In fact, I think it could have been #1 story of the day. Chinese officials crack down on crypto. China has banned financial institutions and payment companies from providing services related to cryptocurrencies. Under the ban, institutions must not offer clients any activities such as registration, trading, clearing, and settlement related to cryptocurrencies. The new dollar de-dollarization strategy could be here anytime soon. China has been actively working on its own digital currency, the digital yuan. And the advantage of the digital yuan is that it will be considered as legal tender. China could force the adoption of the digital yuan for trade partners also, and a potential de-dollarization strategy could heighten tensions between US and China. So just earlier, I was talking about MMT, and I was saying that as long as the US had the monetary system, had control of the monetary system, and everybody was using US dollar, it was a reserve currency of the world, and they controlled the seas, and they controlled the airs, that they could manage this. But China is very interesting in this case. This banning of all of these other cryptos, and basically what they're banning is for institutions to approach people like a bank and say, hey, you should do some crypto trading. But the point is that if they can get everybody into the yuan, the crypto yuan concept, then maybe they could really make it, a crypto yuan and make it usable because everybody's using it. But it's a little bit different, of course, than Bitcoin or other types of cryptocurrencies where people aren't really using these cryptocurrencies necessarily for a medium of exchange. They're using them really to speculate and make money in hopes that later those things will be worth a lot more. So the digital yuan may not be such a speculative instrument, but it could be that the Chinese government is going to push people to use it, and that could make it adopted faster than any other currency. All right, let's look at what the Senate Democrats are saying. They're proposing a $52 billion U.S. chip production R&D budget. The Democrat senators proposed $52 billion legislation to boost U.S. semiconductor production. Democrat senators unveiled this to boost semiconductor production and research. U.S. manufacturing has suffered from a chip shortage due to its reliance on foreign suppliers. In 1990, the U.S. produced 37% of the world's semiconductors, but only contribute about 12% today. Now, this proposal will be included in a $120 billion bill to spend on technology research in order to compete with China. The funding aims to help boost alternatives rather than rely on Chinese equipment providers. Investing in U.S. semiconductor industry and R&D could be attractive if this bill passes. Intel and National Advanced Packaging and others could benefit from it. Now, here you see, again, the U.S. is trying to allocate money to get that chip making back to the U.S. for fear that they may lose it to China. All right, let's go to questions. See if we've got any questions out there. Questions for today. The first one from Deepan Raj, invest about Ethereum coin in 2021. Yeah, Ethereum's interesting. I would say it's not bad. You got this. Yep. So Titikon says, how long do you think this new kind of trade war between China and U.S. and China will last? Who do you think has more of a chance of winning? I would say it's going to last forever. Unfortunately, I would argue that the U.S. side has escalated it, and they are most threatened, and so they're trying to hold down China. The result is that I expect in the short term, the U.S. is going to be stronger than China. In particular, they're going to be able to strong arm other countries to fall in line with them against China. We saw that with Huawei and the EU and the UK, that if the US were to ban any particular Chinese manufacturers, that ban would then apply in many of the US allies countries. But in the long run, I tell you, China has a huge amount of momentum, a huge amount of development, a huge number of people. It's hard to bet against that at this point. And that's why you should look at Chinese stocks. Look, there's 3,300 Chinese stocks out there that you could invest in. It's a huge number. All right, next question, Ravi. Oh, Ravi's got a long question. Let's see. Do you believe that US EV companies could surpass European EV cars in quality or product, or could you see them reaching the high-end vehicle markets? I think they're already in the high-end markets. I've seen some electric power high-end vehicles, but US will probably be able to surpass the European cars just because they have a huge domestic market, meaning they have a huge amount of volume. But I would also say that the most prestigious brands like Porsche, Lamborghini, Ferrari, Bentley are not in the US. And so there's the high end, and particularly the high end energy EV could be up to the EU. All right. Kuna Tip says, I'm planning to increase in your AWS Phenomena. Do you have a plan to change mutual funds in the port this or next month? Thank you for your message. And I would say we reassess the funds that are in the port every 3 months. So it's been a while since we've done it. I think we'll do it again in a few weeks. And at that point, I can't say as to whether we'll change anything or not. So at this point, I would say it's probably going to be 3 or 4 weeks before we will consider that. And then once we consider that, we'll see if we change. But truthfully, I don't have any idea if we'll be making any change. But if we make changes, it's probably going to be 3 to 4 weeks from now. All right, next, Suchai. And by the way, Kuna Tip, thank you for that. And look forward to seeing you. If you need more information, just let me know. Suchai says, with many countries prioritizing its capabilities in semiconductor chip production, do you believe it's an agenda to secure national security rather than trade? Yeah, I do think that national security is a major issue. And so, yes, I do think that what's happening is that these companies are trying, number one, to deal with the supply shortage, but number two, there's this whole national security angle. Do you think countries will ease their climate policies? Yes. Yeah, definitely. And the reason why is because they're going to find out how damn expensive it is. I mean, if it was not expensive to move away from fossil fuels, we'd already be doing it. Companies would be doing it. People would be doing it. They'd be trying to reduce costs, but it's expensive to do that. Just look at solar, look at wind. These things can be very expensive. And of course, we also know that the battery storage capacity is one of the limiting factors. So I think that there'll be a huge amount of push. Everybody wants it. We all want to see clean, fresh air. But the reality is, are you willing to pay 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the amount? And if you're not paying 2 or 3 or 4 times the amount because it's more expensive in the market, it's because the government is subsidizing it and you're paying that as a taxpayer. So ultimately, the cost of it is massive. And I suspect that these very ambitious programs will be pulled back at some point. All right, next question. Ravi says, do you see more countries banning cryptocurrencies and instead governments providing their own cryptos? Kind of yes and no. I think the China situation is unique. First of all, China is so fraud and speculation is so rampant in China that the regulator has to try to do something to prevent zillions of frauds related to crypto. So that's the first reason why you saw a crackdown on crypto. This latest crackdown, I suspect, is because the government wants to roll out its digital yuan. And if it can get everybody into that, then it will have accomplished a huge feat of basically replacing its currency with a digital currency. So I suspect that maybe it's a short-term thing for the next year or so, and maybe it'll come back. Because the problem with crypto is that people find ways to invest in it outside of the country. We see that in Thailand. If people don't invest in a local exchange, they move their money outside of Thailand and invest out there. And I know that between the Bank of Thailand and the regulator, they're starting to question whether that's a smart policy from their side. All right, next. Chris says, what do you think U.S. would do to counter the digital yuan? They basically, first thing they say is, you cannot transact in this if you're trading with us in the U.S. And so they're going to basically say that you can't. It's a little bit like when there was the idea of the Asian Development Bank, and that was China that was going to support that and back that. And the U.S. tried to block everybody from joining it. The U.S. will try to block anybody that uses digital yuan in hopes that they can put a stop to it. I suspect retaliatory types of things will come from them. And what do you think about Cardano? Cardano. 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 I don't know what Cardano is, so I don't have a very strong opinion, but I could make one up, but I don't think I will. All right, next question is, what is the benefit for Japan with UK by joining TPP? So the benefit for Japan, I believe that Japan is part of the TPP, and therefore they'll be able to trade with the UK, be able to export things to the UK, get export products from the UK. So it's just basically lower tariffs mainly. Now, it's also protections related to intellectual property. So if Japan has any intellectual property, they will have protections in the UK market. So Chai says, could Thailand come up with their own digital currency? Thailand could definitely come up with its own digital currency, but maybe the question is why? Is it necessary? Thailand's not trying to make a reserve currency for the world. That's one thing. The second thing is that many countries don't actually want to have some sort of digital currency because of the fact that it means, particularly if it's blockchain based, it means that the country must reveal how much currency is out there. And not only that, but they may have some limits on how much currency that they could produce. So a true cryptocurrency is something in particular like Bitcoin, is something that has a limited supply. Governments don't like that because they want to be able to print money. And when they print money, they're borrowing from future taxpayers, right? When they print money, they're inflating the currency and they're hurting, others. So I would say Thailand could do it, but I would think that for the purposes of Thailand, the existing banks are doing it. SCB and other ones are trying to come up with ways of doing a digital currency. So there are my answers to some of the questions for today. I want to thank you guys all for questions, and please keep the questions coming. Hopefully you're gaining and learning every single day. I'll see you tomorrow.